Have you ever stopped and wondered if that expensive university degree is still really worth it? Well, what if I told you that some of the biggest companies on the planet, think Apple and Google, have already decided it isn't always necessary? Today, we're going to dive into this really fascinating study that shows a huge shift in what employers are looking for, and we're going to use the booming economy of Vietnam as a perfect real-world example. All right, let's get right into it. Higher education is facing this massive challenge right now, and it all comes down to one pretty uncomfortable question. Is a college degree actually becoming obsolete? This isn't just a hypothetical debate anymore. It's a real trend that's happening right now. And some of the biggest players in the global economy, they're already making their moves. I mean, just look at this list. You've got Apple, Google, Starbucks, even a top-tier firm like EY. These are not small-time companies. They are world leaders. And they've started dropping the bachelor's degree requirement for a whole bunch of jobs, and that even includes management positions. It's a clear signal that they care way more about your skills than your credentials. And this whole trend has even got a name now, STARS. It stands for Skilled Through Alternative Routes. In the US alone, get this, there are actually more STARS than there are workers with a bachelor's degree. We're talking about a massive, largely untapped talent pool that companies are just now starting to wake up to. So, to really get a grip on this shift, we need to go somewhere the pressure is on full blast. Let's zoom in on the case study from our source material, the incredible economic boom happening in Vietnam. Okay, so the stage is set for some absolutely explosive growth. Vietnam's on a path to become a global economic powerhouse. But to fuel that kind of growth, you need an endless supply of skilled, top-quality workers. So naturally, companies look to the universities to provide that talent. But there's a big problem. And here's where it gets really interesting. You see this paradox. The number of workers in Vietnam with a degree has jumped a lot. I mean, from under 15% to almost 25% in just a decade. So you've got more graduates than ever before. And yet, businesses are all complaining that they just can't find good people. The researchers who wrote this paper put it perfectly with this really powerful analogy. Think of it like this. Universities are the supplier, and companies are the customer. So what happens when that supplier starts delivering a product that the customer just can't use? Well, the customer starts looking for a new supplier. Okay, so if the supply of university degrees isn't meeting the demand for actual talent, what do employers really want? The answer from this study reveals this huge disconnect that goes all the way to the top. And here it is. This is the showstopper. Over half, 50.3%, of all companies surveyed in Vietnam said they would hire a manager without a university degree as long as they had the right skills. Now, let that sink in for a second. We're not talking about an entry-level job. We're talking about a management position. The degree is now officially optional for leadership in half the companies. Wow. And that's because companies are shifting their focus from what's on your diploma to this one key idea: competency. It's not about what you've studied. It's about what you can actually provably do. It's about real-world skills that you can see and that directly lead to success on the job. In this right here shows you the competency gap perfectly. On the left, you've got the skills that graduates do have, things like integrity and a desire to learn. That's great stuff. But look at the right side. These are the critical, action-oriented skills they're missing: self-management, taking initiative, stress tolerance, and practical problem-solving. These are the skills that actually drive a modern business. And if you're thinking, well, my great grades will save me, think again. The study found that almost 55% of companies don't even look at a candidate's university grades when they're hiring. This just proves it even more. For the majority of employers, your academic transcript is becoming, well, kind of irrelevant. So this all leads to the obvious question, right? Why? Why does this gap exist? Why aren't universities producing graduates who have these skills that companies are desperate for? Well, the source material points to some pretty deep-rooted issues. Let's break it down. When it comes to problem solving, the skills are weak because the whole education system is about passing exams, not about real-world practice. And as for stress tolerance, well, that's a bit more complicated. It turns out there's this massive cultural clash between generations that's putting a totally unique and intense pressure on young people today. And this quote just nails that generational clash. You have parents who grew up in a completely different era, pushing their kids toward the old definition of success, get a safe, stable government job. But their kids are looking at a whole new world, where talent and ambition in the private sector, that's what really matters. This fundamental disagreement is a huge source of stress. And that problem-solving issue gets crystal clear when you look at the education path itself. I mean, it's a 16-year academic marathon. You start at age 5, and it's nonstop studying with very little room for any real-world work experience. The whole system is just geared toward that one final exam. So the result is pretty predictable, isn't it? You end up with graduates who are absolute experts at memorizing information and taking tests. But they've never really had the chance to practice solving the messy, complicated, unpredictable problems they're going to face on day one of a real job. So what's the big takeaway from all this? Look, this story isn't just about Vietnam. What this research found is a massive wake-up call for education systems absolutely everywhere. When you boil it all down, what we're seeing is a serious breakdown of trust. For decades, a university degree was a reliable signal to employers that you were capable. This data shows that for a huge number of companies, that signal is now broken. So, what's the path forward? The researchers suggest a pretty radical shift. First, education policy needs to start treating businesses like the main customer. Second, universities and industries have to stop living in their own separate worlds and actually collaborate. And finally, the whole culture needs to shift to encourage people to take ownership of their own continuous, lifelong learning. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question. If universities are the supplier and businesses are the customer, what happens when that customer finds a better, more reliable, and more effective way to get what they need? The answer to that question is going to define the future of work and education for all of us.